Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News Weekend. We begin with a cabinet minister who has had shifting Indigenous ancestry claims and co-owns a business that applied for a federal grant in 2020 that was specifically for Indigenous-owned businesses. Federal Employment Cabinet Minister and MP for Edmonton Centre, Randy Boissonnault, has stepped down from cabinet. Chris has more.
In that statement, it says Prime Minister Trudeau and Boissonnault both came to an agreement that Boissonnault would be stepping away from his ministerial duties, effective immediately, to focus on clearing the allegations made against him. Meanwhile, Veterans Affairs Minister Jeanette Pettipas-Taylor will temporarily assume responsibility for Boissonnault's portfolios in addition to her current duties. In the past, Boissonnault has called himself a non-status adopted Cree and claimed his great-grandmother was a full-blooded Cree woman, but has since walked back those claims, instead saying she was Métis. Boissonnault also said the business grant incident was done without his knowledge, and that in the end his business did not successfully qualify for the grant. APTN News has reached out to Boissonnault's office for a comment, but did not hear back.
Members of a First Nation community in northwestern Ontario are ready to escalate their call for action to address rising crime and addiction rates. Leadership in Pic-Mobert recently declared a state of emergency due to gang activity, which they say is due to a lack of policing resources. And they're demanding action from the federal and provincial governments. APTN's Mike McDonald reports.
The chief of Nipmuc Anishinaabe, otherwise known as Pic-Mobert, says the community is at a crisis point following a series of violent incidents stemming from the unchecked presence of organized crime, which leadership says is due to inadequate policing resources.
Community members are acting on behalf of these organized crimes. They're doing a lot of these violent crimes to other community members.
People are seeing that window and that gap of lawlessness that leads to an environment where people are taking advantage of that situation, mainly organized crime gangs, where they're exploiting the situation that we have a lack in policing services, such that I'd go so far to say is that we are becoming a warehouse for the drug epidemic for the region.
Chief Quiswa says the violent incidents coupled with delayed emergency response has people fearing for their safety, even in their own homes.
A lot of our people don't feel safe, particularly our elders. I've had conversations with community members indicating that they don't feel safe and they're worried at night and they're worried about the mental health of their children.
The state of emergency was a topic of discussion in the Ontario legislature this week as NDP MP Saul Mamakwa brought it up during question period.
The lack of police presence and delays in emergency response has created a crisis. To the Premier, will you commit today to answer Nipmuc and Anishinaabe specific calls to action to bring the First Nation out of state emergency?
Mr. Speaker, when the federal government comes to the table and antes up more money to do the right thing, Ontario will do it as well.
They use jurisdiction as an excuse not to do anything. And they outright said that when I asked that during question period, that's what they is. We're going to wait for the feds, see what they do.
However, Nipmuc Anishinaabe leadership says they won't wait for jurisdictional squabbles to be resolved, that they're prepared to increase the pressure on the government.
We will disrupt the economy. We will look at solutions such as demonstrations as roadblocks, protests. If we need to go that far, we're prepared to do so because lives are at risk. And if the provincial and federal government do not respond, we'll go to those measures if we need to.
Chief Quiswa and CEO Moses were in Toronto earlier this week for a scheduled meeting with Ontario cabinet ministers to discuss how to bring an end to the state of emergency. However, that meeting was cancelled at the last minute. Mike McDonald, APTN National News.
Recently, healthcare professionals discussed implementing Indigenous practices within the healthcare system. A panel organized by the Canadian Psychiatric Association hosted the talk in Montreal, As APTN's Savannah Craig reports, some healthcare facilities are already doing this, but can it be extended across Canada?
Indigenous medicine, Indigenous healing systems are firmly in place, and that they work, and that they need to be part of the treatment and care plan for our people when they come into our system.
Elder Diane Longboat is one of the 3 members invited to speak on the importance of integrating Indigenous practices within Canada's healthcare system at this year's Canadian Psychiatric Association's event.
We do need more work for culturally grounded research and culturally grounded clinical services.
Longboat is Mohawk from 6 nations of the Grand River Territory. She is an elder in the Shakwabe-Mukwa Leadership Circle at the Toronto Mental Health Hospital. This is the first centre in Canada to lead a culturally responsive way to provide healthcare for Indigenous people.
And I recommend having a First Nations, Inuit, and Métis standing committee of the board.
Longboat said institutions should not wait on governments to implement better healthcare for Indigenous patients.
They have not taken seriously the stories of our people. They have not taken seriously the mental health and addiction challenges that have been a direct result of government policy. And so until the Government of Canada and the provincial governments take the voices of our people seriously, we will continue to see so many of our people suffering from inadequate housing, poor education, poor access to mental health care.
Panelist Dr. Jason Pennington is a member of the Huron-Wendat Nation and a surgeon at the Scarborough Health Network.
The impacts of colonialism, racism, social exclusion, those are the things that have happened to Indigenous people, and until we address those basic needs, we will never attain health equity with the rest of the Canadian population.
He identified 3 of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions that need to be implemented. The calls to action he identified include increasing the representation of Indigenous people within the healthcare profession and requiring students in the medical field to undergo Indigenous-centered training.
The healthcare system should do a better job embracing Indigenous health concepts and practices.
Pennington says this training should not only be taught in schools, but that this education should be continued throughout one's professional career.
It's something each and every healthcare provider has to be continually working on.
Savannah Craig, APTN National News, Montreal.
To the north now, where the Yukon government has finally opened a managed alcohol program in Whitehorse after months of delay. The Managed Alcohol Program, also known as MAP, supports people with severe and treatment-resistant alcohol use disorder. The program can house up to 10 people and provides direct access to managed, medically supervised doses of alcohol in a safe setting as part of a tailored care plan. The program was supposed to open earlier this spring, but was delayed due to staffing issues. The government is providing $1.3 million in funding for the program. 3 First Nations in Northern Ontario are taking the federal government and the city of Kenora to court. Details on that and much more still to come. Welcome back to northwestern Ontario now, where 3 First Nations say they are preparing for one of the biggest legal battles in their community's history. They claim they have rightful ownership of a park within the city of Kenora. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
What exactly happened here at Anishinaabe Park?
On this wet November day, Chief Chris Skeed of Wajashk Onagum reflects on traditional teachings as he prepares himself for a legal battle.
Through Vimiwan, which is rain, for Mother Earth to cleanse herself. To me, I see it as getting support from our Creator in a discussion such as this.
With the drum at the center, Skeed and 2 neighboring First Nations, Waskaganish Bay and Nisatchewin, gather inside this bingo hall to tell their band members they are heading to court, as they have submitted a statement of claim against the city of Kenora and Canada. At issue, Anishinaabe Park was illegally taken from them 50 years back.
I feel like the park was a place of gathering, it was coming together, it was building relationships. It really was a place of healing.
In 1974, an occupation by the Ojibwe War Society occurred on these lands, gaining international headlines.
My great uncle Louis Cameron was the one that spearheaded the whole occupation. I wasn't born at the time when it all happened, but just knowing the history about it and reading it and learning about it more.
Across the lake at the park, Jeanette Skeed takes a walk down memory lane. In 74, she recalls her late husband was in the middle of the dispute.
At that time, that he was a mediator, so between the police, OPP, and Treaty Tree.
Their daughter Sally was also one of 80 youth on the front lines.
They had guns and everything, so it was hard for us as parents. There was always this fear of what was going to happen.
Skeed recalls seeing supports from all over Turtle Island come and go, including some from the American Indian movement.
And we met Dennis Banks at that time, just from a Wounded Knee and that.
After 6 weeks of tension, the occupation ended peacefully with an agreement that the land would be returned. While there are some signs of reconciliation and land acknowledgements in Kenora, there is still no land back.
The city of Kenora had opportunity to do the right thing, and that was return the land to its rightful owners.
The city and the Attorney General of Canada have until the end of the month to file a statement of defense. Neither have responded to APTN on whether or not they will. But given how much time has passed, Skeed believes one will be filed. He hopes it can be resolved with Ontario's Superior Court, but is prepared to go all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada.
We're in a process of healing right now, and a big part of the healing is land. Since time immemorial, we've done our ceremonies, our clothing, our way of life.
Vowing to protect the land like his ancestors set out to do half a century ago. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Kenora.
2025 will mark the 35th anniversary of the term two-spirit. It was created to represent Indigenous peoples with fluid gender identities and sexualities. Earlier this week, a historic flag unveiling and documentary premiere took place in Winnipeg ahead of the anniversary. Reporter Sierra Bettens has more.
In 1990, Elder Mira Laramie introduced the term two-spirit at the 3rd Annual Intertribal Native American, First Nations, Gay and Lesbian American Conference in Winnipeg. It comes from the Anishinaabe term, Nijmanadoeg, describing a person with masculine and feminine characteristics. It helped Charlotte Nolan understand who she was.
When the term was coined here in Manitoba, I was sitting in the sweat lodge at the University of BC, and that's when I was told who I was.
On Tuesday at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, the International Day of Pink organization hosted a celebration to honor two-spirit history and resilience. The event kicked off with the unveiling of the world's first two-spirit pride flag. Patrick Hunter, a two-spirit Anishinaabe artist from Ontario, designed it. It features 2 eagle feathers, representing the balance of masculine and feminine spirits. They're framed by a sun and a rainbow of dots.
The sun, he kind of provides us with everything else that we need in this life. And I just felt like using dots instead of sort of like colorful bars would be cool because, you know, the earliest artwork that we see there out on pictographs out in the world are dots and circles, and I just thought what a throwback to, 7 generations ago.
Brielle Beardy Linklater, a two-spirit activist from the Nisichawayasik Cree Nation, was featured in the documentary Reemergence, which premiered at the event.
We have a changing population, and we have so many young people today who know more about who they are, but they want the resources that go along with it, and I think this video will lead to those necessary changes.
The event was put on ahead of the Day of Pink, an annual anti-bullying and anti-homophobia event held on April 9th. The Day of Pink organization is now launching a two-spirit curriculum guide with free learning materials for teachers and students. Sierra Bettens, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
By 2030, the federal government wants to have every household in Canada to have access to high-speed internet. Last week, they announced $38 million will be invested into northern Manitoba for the upgrade, most of which are Indigenous communities. With more, here's T.R. Wheatley.
In the middle of the Human Rights Museum, Dan Vandel, minister responsible for economic development in the prairies, said high-speed internet connectivity is a human right.
For people in rural, northern, and isolated communities, dependable, high-speed internet can be life-changing.
It's why the feds are investing $38 million under the Universal Broadband Fund to connect over 3,600 homes in 14 rural communities in Manitoba's north, with 3,000 of those homes in First Nations, including Sapatoyak Cree Nation. Their chief, Nelson Janai, says his community's had big plans in telehealth and education for years, but because of its location, they've been crippled.
We had a vision of how to make it work. We had a lab service where x-ray would be done, where we'd be able to sit down with telehealth. But because of connectivity, we weren't able to do that. Back in 2007, we built the school to grade 12. Smart boards were there. But because of connectivity, we weren't able to access them. So now the opportunity is there.
Opportunity that also includes investing in Indigenous communities. David Muswagen is with Kichisi Communications, a joint venture between Pimpichikamak and Norway House. The business will provide services to the two First Nations and some of their neighbors.
This is a corporation that's going to be a new ISP service provider that's going to be competing with the Bells, the Shaws, and everything. We're not rolling out the red carpet for anybody. We're playing for keeps on this one because we want that economic power to be able to build a foundation for our people, create jobs, create training, and create revenue. So that way we can start getting our people off the social services system.
The plan is to have the 14 communities connected by January 2025. T.R. Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A new video game is in the works with an Indigenous perspective. That story and more coming up. Welcome back. A new video game has been developed that shines light on 17th century history using an Indigenous voice. According to the creators, this is the first game made in Quebec from an Indigenous perspective. Kim Sullivan tells us more.
The cheering is well-deserved. These video game creators worked hard for months to finally see their production go live. Two Falls, Nishu Takuachina was developed by Unreliable Narrators, an independent video game studio in Montreal. The game's composer and sound designer, art director, actors, and story writer are all members of various First Nations communities. The studio's goal is to make players reflect on today's society through rich storytelling, giving a voice to those who are too often ignored.
We wanted to meet this to talk about the 17th century history, where the French and Indigenous community meet their first meeting, and it's a very rich part of history that we don't hear often enough, and we thought there was a lot of things that we could dig in and tell with Two Falls.
Two Falls offers a powerful narrative that interweaves the journey of two young individuals. Jeanne, a young woman from France who shipwrecks in the New World, and Maikan, a young Innu hunter whose instincts tell him that something is disturbing the forest. Players will take turns embodying each character, discovering their unique realities and cultures. Iatse, who is Wendat, says through two distinct artistic directions and soundtracks, players will experience two ways of seeing, hearing, and feeling the world.
Yeah, I went with two different perspectives and I used different instruments for both of them. So for Jeanne, it was more like orchestral and with strings, and Maikan was more like with percussions, Indigenous percussions such as the Hiandarqua, which was the hand drum, and the rattle is the Yastawansha. So I always use the same instruments for both of them, and I try to as well go in emotions, and you can somehow recognize from the melodies in both perspectives, you can recognize the same emotion, but is different because I'm using different instruments.
Berthiaume says the same events can have very different meanings, which will lead players to question certain preconceptions and, in doing so, allow them to better understand Indigenous cultures.
It doesn't shy away from very sensitive themes and tackles with a lot of nuance, and it wants to make you think and understand and recognize what happened in the 17th century and the centuries afterwards.
The studio not only worked closely with Indigenous creative minds, but also approached a council of Innu and Wendat elders to ensure that the message was representative.
We have a council of elders who validated everything that we brought into the game, from messages, themes, historical accuracy, their culture, what elements we can show and what we cannot show. So they have been a very huge integral part of the production and creation.
Two Falls is now available for streaming and on Epic Games Store. Kim Sullivan, APTN National News, Montreal.
Pretty cool stuff. Now to some other cool news. Next time you pull money out of your pocket, take a closer look because there's a new coin in town. Once again, here's APTN's Kim Sullivan to tell us all about it.
Now Our Change celebrates Inuit Nunangat and the distinct ways of life, vibrant cultures, and rich heritage that highlight Inuit unity and strength.
On it, you will see the words Inuit Nunangat, a vast area that encompasses land, water, and ice. It is the Inuit homeland from which its people find their strength, resilience, unity, and identity. It is also the inspiration behind the latest commemorative $2 circulation coin released by the Royal Canadian Mint. The Royal Canadian Mint, Inuit Tapirut Kanatami, and 4 Inuit artists, each representing one of the 4 regions of Inuit Nunangat, Nunatsiavut, Nunavut, Nunavik, and the Inuvialuit settlement region, worked closely together in real time through a series of virtual meetings. One of those artists is Tamasi Magnat.
We spoke quite often over the telephone. Internet wasn't always reliable, so we tried a bit. But once we worked together, once we worked on our own artwork, we shared them amongst the group. So we got to see what we made, and then we started putting pieces together, modifying our own images, so it turns into a unified image on a coin.
On the outer rim of the coin, we find a traditional pattern and 4 distinct ulus, one from each artist's region.
We heard growing up of Nuleayo. You can look into the story, but her hands were cut, and then in the water, when her hands started bleeding, they turned into animals. And growing up, we're told to respect the animals, not just to kill them, but if we do kill them, we have to eat them. So with the importance of animals, the relationship we have with animals, we wanted to represent them along with Nuleayo.
In the center of the tuni, sea creatures float alongside Nuleayuk, spirit of the sea. This new $2 circulation coin is limited to a mintage of 3 million coins, of which 2 million will be colored. Limited edition special wrap rolls of uncirculated coins are also available for purchase through the Mint. Kim Sullivan, APTN National News, Montreal.
Thanks, Kim. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. Of course, for news anytime, you can visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great weekend.